No, this is my The audacity! The audacity! I'm not even finished yet. I am not even finished yet.
So this creature here is a mo'o. If you live in Hawaii, you will learn that they will make themselves at home. And for Kanaka Maoli, the native Hawaiians, they are always welcome. They're not just smaller, inferior creatures to humans. In Hawaiian culture, mo'o are sometimes aumakua, which are ancestral spirit guides in Hawaiian culture. And from the creation stories like the Kumolipo, the mo'o come long before humans, meaning they are our elders. Not only do you find mo'o all around in the island environment, we also see the word mo'o in many other Hawaiian words. For example, the word mo'olelo is commonly known to mean stories or history. Olelo means language or speech, and mo'o here means succession. The word often understood as genealogy is mo'oku auhau, but as we will find out later, it means more than just a family tree. As Marie Alohalani Brown says in the introduction to this book, we are a part of a complex web of relationality, in which everything in our native island world, land, sea, and sky, and all therein are kin. This relationality is also spiritual, for we are the younger human relatives of other than human entities in our island world, many of whom we consider akua, or deities. So, in Mo'oku Auhau, we find the indigenous epistemology of Kanaka. Now, after Mo'o, we have ku, which means to stand up or to be anchored. And Auhau literally means the humerus and femur bones. When strung together, Moko'u Auhau speaks of the succession of our ancestors and the mana within their bones buried in the Aina, the land, which establishes our place to stand tall, our place from which to speak, protect, defend, and love. So the word mana here in this passage means spiritual power. So Moko'u Auhau has many layered meanings. It informs a diverse array of indigenous research methodologies of Hawaii, and this book is a collection of several examples of it. These methodologies correspond well to the frameworks we have already seen in the works of Linda Tuhivai-Smith, Kovash, and Sean Wilson. If we were to place Mo'oku Auhau as an epistemological paradigm in Wilson's model, we can see how it is also integral to the Hawaiian way of being, its ontology, its ethics, axiology, and this relationality of succession permeates each domain of traditional qualitative methodological praxis. So if we looked at Kovash's model, Mo'oku Auhau as epistemology works itself all the way down. This succession is a web of relations that becomes theory, which informs the actions and strategies, and become the interpretations and representations of shared knowledge. So you can see that this Hawaiian indigenous methodology shares in these other frameworks that we've looked at. And just like the other indigenous methodologies, Mo'oku Auhau is about the past, the present, and the futurity of Kanaka Oiwi. So as this book is a collection of articles about Hawaiian indigenous methodologies, we're just going to highlight a few key examples. But here's a quick overview of the collection. Neilani Wilson Hokuwitu is the editor and author of the introduction and chapter 9. Like some of the other authors in the book, she is a Kanaka born in diaspora and is now a professor at the University of Waikato in New Zealand. She was also a crew member who voyaged on the Hokulea. Chapter 3, Papaku Makavalu, A Methodology and Pedagogy of Understanding the Hawaiian Universe, is a really deep chapter by Kale Nuhu Iwa. To me, it's like on the more, not positivist side, but very scientific, while operating from the indigenous epistemological paradigm. It draws its main points from the Hawaiian Kumulipo creation narrative.
Back to the very, very beginning of time when there was complete darkness. And so it speaks of a time where there was, the earth was hot. Okeao ikahuli vela kahonua. Hot was the earth. And okeao ikahuli lole kalani, and the heavens started to churn. And once that happened, this darkness came forth. And it was a deep darkness of po and lipo. And through this churning and mixing together of these elements, the slime started to form. And the vale, that is the basis of all of our life. And from then, kumulipo, the male element of the universe, was born. And po'ele, the female element of the universe, was born. And through their joining, everything else came forth. You know, hanau, keko'a, hanau, ka'akwa, ko'a, all the different forms of coral and sea life that were born. And it's really amazing to really look at the kumulipo, because you start to get an understanding of what preceded what needed to be born first before the next form had been born or evolved into. And you see this evolution of life through time, through these 16 wa, or eras of creation. And you know, Kanaka doesn't come until way later. So yeah, it's very amazing to see the genealogy and the mo'okuauhau of us as Kanaka. And we can literally trace ourselves all the way back to Kumulipo and Po'ele, the beginning of time. And it gives us a sense of humility and kuleana, because we come at the end. So everything that came before is honored as an elder, as a kupuna. And so that was the Kumulipo.
And in it, she dissects some very, very deep layers of this kumulipo and applies it to 3 different specific areas of environmental sciences. The main ideas out of this chapter are understanding the Hawaiian universe as a foundational methodology. So it systematically organizes all the accumulated knowledges of generations of the ancestors, how they obtain these through observations and interactions with the natural world. So from the natural and environmental sciences, Chapter 4 moves into using indigenous methodologies for literary research in the literary context. This, of course, piques my interest as an English education doctoral student. There's one phrase in this particular chapter that strikes me, and I've used it in my own curriculum development, and that is ika olelo ke ola, ika olelo ke make. In the language is life, and in the language is death. This is another one of the olelo no eau, the proverbs that are used throughout all these indigenous methodologies in this book. But the overall emphasis in this chapter is that this is not something new to the Hawaiians, that these concepts have a genealogy that go far, far back. In Chapter 1 of The Past Before Us, Dr. Ku Kahakalau introduces us to the indigenous research methodology she created called Ma'awe Pono, which roughly translates to the path of honor and responsibility. So when I chose this book, I didn't know that someone I actually knew was one of the authors. So it sort of felt like cheating when I learned that Dr. Ku Kahakalau wrote the first chapter. However, I learned a lot about how Dr. Kahakalau developed her indigenous methodology coming out of the Western Academy and trying to do meaningful work in her Hawaiian community. I'm more familiar with her later work, so it was fascinating for me to learn how she followed the trajectory of the rise of qualitative research paradigms and pretty much figuring out how to do indigenous methodology without some of the resources we have today. Kahakalau credits Smith's decolonizing methodologies as a guide for her work. The 8 phases that she maps out in this chapter are essentially participatory action research protocols. But Kahakalau discovered that by consulting the Olelo no eau, the Hawaiian proverbs, that these methods of inquiry were already deeply embedded in Hawaiian epistemology. So here's an example of that.
So this pedagogy of aloha, it's really simple. Relations is the most important thing. Relevance is the next thing. It has to be relevant. It has to make sense. And then kuleana is the next part, because if I'm going to give you the ike, then you have some kuleana. And then you don't have to worry about rigor, because that's going to happen automatic. So it's culturally driven, family-oriented, community-focused, and place-focused, the same as they had already talked about. And the part that we're working on, as I said, is the economically sustainable part. So what it is about, our values and our traditions are the guidelines for instruction. So we all aloha each other. The knowledge, the Hawaiian knowledge, is the foundation of the curriculum. So everything, whether it's PE, whether it's science, whether it's history, whether it's language arts, it all starts, in your case, in Waianae and moves outward. For our case, it starts in Waimea and it moves outward. Wherever you are, it starts in your place. That's the first thing you should learn about, and then you move outwards. And when it comes to assessment, we call it ho'ike. We've done it for thousands of years. We all know how it works. They came up with it yesterday, and they call it performance-based assessment to an authentic audience. Okay? But we already know it. We've done it. We know how it works.
So this is an example of Kahakalau's more recent work, and as you can see, she's quite comfortable developing her pedagogy of aloha as a Hawaiian doing research for Hawaiians. The emphasis is on starting local and working outwards in constructing knowledge. Her work has inspired many new projects throughout the islands, including the Hawaiian culture-based high school where I was a teacher.